Roll up, roll up. See the future stars of rock. Watch 3 live bands, magic tricks, guitar masterclasses. Be entertained by card shufflers, chord shufflers, and note makers. In the awesome surroundings of the Weald of Kent under the big top of this kingdom, your chance to be entertained or even win a BC Rich guitar. On the 12th of March, starting at 3:30 through to 7:30 at the wonderful Kingdom near Penshurst, we will be doing a fundraising event for the Ikaro Music to enable young people to learn to play the guitar and write songs. Be sure to be there. Numbers are limited. Follow the link in the show notes on the Eventbrite. Today I'm talking to Bruno Migliorini. Hi, how are you doing?
Hello, good and you. Long time no see.
Yes, absolutely. I was trying to work that out now. How long? 10 years? No,
Jesus Christ.
more than that, isn't it?
Over 10 years, yeah, probably more around 15 than 10.
Yeah. So I have a traditional first question, Bruno, which is, what do you do?
What do you do in life generally?
Yeah. You
Okay,
can answer it
so
in whatever way you want.
cool. I heard a couple of your podcasts that you shared with me, and then I was quite surprised that you asked me in because I'm literally nobody. Um,
Well, you are actually, but we carry on.
I work currently for a company that's doing microfinance. So it's finance for the non-bankerized people. We are active in pretty much around the planet, all the places that would be associated to that. So Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Central America, Asia, etc., etc. And before that, I was working I was developing a renewable energy company based in South Africa, over 20 countries on the continent. And that's how I came across this microfinance company, and then I started working with them. And it's been now 3 years that I've been involved with them.
Well, that
Um,
sounds pretty damn cool to me. But we met doing NLP.
Correct, yes. So that's been a long journey of mine.
Yes.
Started when I was a kid. And it was actually as a consequence of a journey of my mother's, who was into personal development. And she came across quite early on with NLP, I think in the late 80s or in the early 90s, when NLP was really just at its, I mean, it was not really famous at the time.
No, that's right.
And I'm not even sure it's famous now, to be honest.
Well, it's interesting, this, isn't it? Because I think if you're in it, you think everybody knows about it. But of course, when you talk to people, a lot of people go like, yeah, what's that? And then other
Exactly.
people, it's really weird.
Exactly. And as a matter of fact, I took some psychology studies after my NLP trainings. And I thought, well, at least there people would know, like if you go to more therapy or psychocognitive kind of theories, which are very similar. I mean, NLP is basically a big summary of all that, except that
Yes.
you don't provide this theory to that specific person from that specific university from, like, I don't know which year, that has been tested here and there. It's basically just a big summary of practical um, tools that you find in psychology, in coaching, in psychotherapy, put together in a rather smart way, and which is both, I mean, not that hard to understand, but hard to practice for yourself and for others. But it's a fascinating tool, I would say.
Yes, I totally get that. Yeah, but did you find that a lot of people within that just didn't know what it was, or were they a bit sort of did
I
they sort of scoff
actually,
at it a little bit because it's
yeah, I don't think people have even heard about it.
mm,
It's this thing that between what's happening at university and what's happening in practice, there's about 20 years difference,
yeah,
especially in psychology, because every theory needs a long time to be proven. Um,
yes,
and it's very difficult to find a paradigm that will allow you to isolate just one item out of the
yes,
many elements of the subjectivity of a human being and use that scientifically to prove that this very method works, because it would work on somebody, on one person but not on another one, for
yes,
instance, because of said subjectivity.
yes. The thing is with the soft science, they're all a bit like that, aren't they? Because you could sort of point that to sort of economics and go like, well, that didn't work, or whatever. Somebody can have a theory that's, and then somebody else comes up with a theory and they're contradictory and all the rest of it. So
Funnily enough, in my career, I started realizing I've moved on from pure analysis of institution to understand the strength and what they do and all of that to a more risk-based analysis function. So for each of the companies we work with, we study the potential risks that may arise from the
yeah,
company, the environment, the politics, the country, whatever you name it. War in Ukraine, for instance, has had a major impact all over the world in many aspects, and like cost of life
yeah,
and all of that. And I find that there's a lot of, in finance at least, and probably for many things, and even art and all of that, there's a lot of a common belief dimension. If everyone believes in a project, that project receives a lot of money and becomes successful as a consequence.
yes,
But when people stop believing in something, then money stops flowing, and then it's very
yes,
hard to make a success out of nothing. So
exactly. So it's a
there,
sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a weird sort of way.
exactly.
Um, and I see this with music, with artists and stuff. And look at the people who have become very successful, and you look at them, and the logical thing is that they're really good. But in actual fact, they're no better than somebody who didn't make it. And occasionally you could look at some and go, yeah, but they're really good looking. But that doesn't always fit the bill either, because fortunately, I would say this now, but we've had some fabulous singers who aren't necessarily stunning looking, which is certainly
Exactly.
with female vocalists. That tended to be the thing, that somebody was a really good looking person and they could sing. But
And
now, you've got people that aren't necessarily
and famous singers that can't actually sing properly.
exactly, totally. I get that, and you would sort of go, well, and you could look at bands and go, well, they're not necessarily the best players or anything, particular, but they hit something that's a vibe. But again, you can't measure that.
No,
You
it's not.
can't
It's
measure that.
absolutely not measurable.
No.
And sometimes all it takes is one person that's more convincing than others, or that's got more uh, open ears access
Yes.
to make a success out of something that is actually going south.
Yes. I get
So
that.
yes, yeah,
Totally.
definitely.
Totally. But
It's the subjectivity of the economy of our world, but
yeah. Yeah.
it's
Absolutely.
basically everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. It's not. As to say, if you say you could look at that from a point of view of funding, or something, how the economics can go down, the economy of countries can go down the pan because of something that's got nothing to do with them at all,
Exactly.
like the Ukraine war, as an example.
It was
Uh,
actually quite. I've got a very recent and tangible example because I was in South Africa at the time, and South Africa is one of these countries in Africa that's got very advanced research for microbiology. So whenever a new variant of COVID was analyzed and found, they would say, "Hey, we found this," and then every country of the world would ban them from from
yeah,
from traveling.
yeah, yeah, yes.
That's
It
nice.
was very, I mean, it's a very large hypocrisy because others might have found it, but just didn't say they found it because they didn't want any sanctions against them
No,
or
no, exactly. Yeah, I've got a friend who's South African. Actually, he was here today having lessons, and he used to say, "Oh my God, typical South African."
yeah, because they can do it and they're very proud to say that they can do it, but
Yes. Yeah, 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 yeah.
very naively as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's cool. So anyway, go back to you were saying about your mum being interested in sort of self-development and stuff, and that's how the NLP thing they got interested in NLP. And then of course you obviously studied it and then ended up in London doing this um, master practitioner course where I met you.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, did you? I mean, how? Because obviously, I use NLP within teaching music and also about the understanding of being able to look at things and be able to model it and stuff. I mean, how useful was it for you in what you've done?
I think I've definitely not used it to its full potential because it's hard. But in a sense, I've used it for myself to have better communications and better
Yeah,
understanding at work
yeah,
with colleagues because we all have our differences of interpretation and values and way to understand life and to communicate as well. So I'm very factual and analytical, but I'm for instance absolutely not structured. So when I communicate with people that are extremely structured, then I might actually irritate them because I skip a few steps while I'm explaining something because I take it for granted that everybody has got the same level of understanding of something. Or some people might require an additional layer of visualization or hearing or that you may not need yourself to get
mm,
a message. But if you want that message to go across and other people to understand it or take it for what it is without hurting anybody's feelings on the way, then
yeah,
because I
yeah,
mean, obviously in a business context, there's always a potential feelings being hurt without intention of hurting them, just because I mean you have to say something.
yeah,
When you touch work of other people, it can become quite sensitive, and in that sense, I find that using NLP as a tool for communicating has been quite fruitful.
mm,
I've actually had a few people that have told me over time that how do you do it? Like you can communicate with everybody, and you seem to be understanding everybody as well. And I think
yeah,
it's besides the fact that I can get my message across quite clearly, it's also the work on myself that I will not let my own way of understanding life
mm,
coming in between the message and myself, in the sense that I would always try to understand point of views and separate the intentions and the emotions into any kind of conversation so that I would not myself reach an early conclusion um, because I would say imagine that what the person actually means is something else that's the person than what the person has said,
yes,
mind reading or whatever,
yes,
which happens all
absolutely,
the time. So being able to highlight these things in myself and understand them or elicit them from others as well has helped me a lot to just get to the core message of any conversation that I have, personal or professional, although it's always easier when it's professional.
yeah, yeah, interesting, yeah. I think you're right because yeah, yeah, I would say that from my own experience. It's actually easier when you're dealing with people um, in a working scenario than it is personally. Definitely, it's tricky, isn't it?
Yep.
Interesting
The,
point. Interesting. So anyway, here's the thing, and I said I've always been fascinated by this, and you said you don't remember this, but I remember this, obviously. Otherwise, I just made it up. But you actually said, and we were sitting in a pub, that was across the road, because afterwards we used to adjourn to this pub,
Yep, I remember that.
and you said that you were going to either you were traveling around the world and that's what you were going to do, or whatever it was. I can't remember this bit, but you said, I will drink coffee at all these particular places all around the world, and I'll photograph myself doing it. And I think this is obviously well before social media, I think, right? But you said you were going to do that. And so when it started to crop up on Facebook, I was like, wow, that's amazing. It's brilliant. So you get, some. I mean, recently there was something from Japan, but you've photographed, had, from Johannesburg and whatever, and obviously on the continent, and just a picture of you and an espresso somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that actually started. Funny story. I studied in South Africa in 2005, so I was about 23 years old at the time. And before going, I can't remember if it was at that precise moment or a little bit before. But my mother had a language school, and one of the things that I wanted to learn was English etiquette. Um, because if you wanna be famous
It's a
and
nightmare.
original, and she had a teacher that was teaching that. So when she said, "I've got this teacher that's got this proposal to teach English etiquette," and I was like, "Oh, I'd be interested in that because
Yeah.
I want to know how to behave in high societies." Well, probably
Yeah,
be.
because I was going to say most English people don't know how to behave anymore.
And one of the things was obviously I had a proper education as well, so most of it was very similar to what I already knew. But one of the things that I did with that person was how to drink, how to drink a hot drink, how to drink a tea or a coffee,
Right.
and it's basically holding the plate and then your cup with two fingers, and then there was a debate about whether you should lift the pinky or not.
Yeah.
Because in America you don't, but
Yeah.
in old England you do.
Well, you used to.
You used to.
You used to, but I don't think it's something that happens now. But it was something because the porcelain cups had very, very small handles.
Exactly. Yeah, there
So
was only space for the two
yeah,
or three
that's
fingers
right.
max.
Yeah.
So 2005, here am I in South Africa, and I have a conversation with a Belgian friend and two German ladies. And I start telling them about that as the coffee arrives. And I can't remember why we reached the topic, but I started drinking my coffee like exactly like
Yes.
this. So
Yeah.
holding the plate and the little pinky out. And my friend was sitting across the table, and he snapped a picture at that time. So that was the very first one, and it was part of the pictures we printed after for some reason. And other people, before it became a concept, other people would do exactly the same, but without consulting each other. Though apparently, I had a funny way of drinking coffees. And then, yeah, at some point it was like, okay, I like to travel, and I traveled a lot since I'm a kid. I was born in Congo, and I went to South Africa and Europe every single year, and then from there, I mean, other travels with my parents, and then when I became in age of traveling by myself, I started going all over the place, and I love taking pictures, but I despise sorting them out and selecting and printing. So I thought, this is actually a thing here, and that might be around the training that we did together. It's like
Yeah.
I will only have one picture per trip.
Oh,
And
right.
that picture would be me drinking a coffee, and then that's it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Because see, I have this thing about taking photographs. I just don't do it. And I've never been that sort of good at documenting things. And other people are brilliant. And I just sort of, when it was the days of having a camera, I would forget to take the camera or whatever. Whereas some of my kids are absolutely brilliant at doing this, and taking really good photographs. Because that was the other thing. I was all right at taking photographs, but I would just sort of forget. It was just not in my mind.
I think it's a personality thing,
I think so. I
I
think
mean,
so.
I've tried so many times, and my wife is like me, to go over some pictures that we took from a trip and say, okay, let's select the best ones, and then we started looking at all the picture and remembering everything, and then an hour or two go by, and
Hmm.
we like we've done 10 pictures out
Yeah,
of
yeah, exactly.
300. So
Because
we're like,
that is the thing. I get the thing about when you look at a picture, it takes you to a place again, takes you back, very, very much like sort of hypnotic induction, isn't it? Really,
exactly.
you know, what did you see and see what you saw and all that sort of stuff. It's very much like that. Sort of, sort of evokes and invokes feelings and memories. And but of course, what we've got now is that thing like we've got for everything is saturation, isn't it? Of
Yep.
like everything is documented, and in a weird way that sort of is overkill of that thing where you look at a picture and it takes you totally back.
It's lost a lot of meaning. I was brainstorming by myself when you asked me about these pictures, and I was like, I remember when I was a kid, like you had to buy a film
Yeah,
for your camera, and it was like 12 or 24 snaps, and then you'd begun and like for a week, and you had one or two or three of these with you, and then you'd have to select like a moment and and
yeah,
and you had to set up like the opening and the speed so that it would not come out blur, but you would only know like a couple of weeks after you
yeah,
actually came back home, and now you snap every 5 minutes the whole day through, and it's always perfect because with these new
yeah,
phones and stuff, you don't even need a camera, but like the intelligence behind gives you the right light and the right whatever. If you know nothing about picture taking like I do, then it does it for you, and it's good enough for everyone. And you can print it; it's high quality, high resolution. But out of 300 pictures, I mean, you can't print everything,
no.
and since we've been traveling a lot, I'd rather even print nothing.
Yes, yes.
Because
Yeah,
of
you're right.
the
And
moving
and
component
again,
of
you
it.
see this thing that happens. It's an interesting point actually that the oversupply of things, whether that's oversupply of music, that is you know basically killing the music industry, um, or the oversupply of photographs, or the oversupply of anything. This idea of choice being this such a great thing because it's actually a disaster. Now we've got God knows how many channels of TV that there's nothing worth watching on any of it. I mean, it's like
Yeah, it becomes a big noise, I find,
yes,
and it's hard
yes,
to have talents really standing out of it,
mm,
from it, because I don't know. I mean, you're in music. I play a bit of music. I love music, but when I hear radio, I don't hear music.
no.
I hear
Well, imagine what it's like for me. I mean,
I hear vocoder. I hear
yes,
beatboxes. I
yeah,
hear.
yeah. Well, it's that sort of thing about where's the real person there? That thing where you feel a connection with the voice that's telling you something from their own experience. Because most of it is like, well, it's a sort of a computerized vocal that's been auto-tuned or something or other. Um, I'm not saying that you can't create art like that because you obviously can, but the trouble is, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, about technology has got a way of possessing you. And it's always
Yeah.
done this. I'm not saying this is not a recent thing, but because things are moving so quickly, it's even more apparent.
There's a
So,
recipe. There's a recipe that works,
mm,
and everything is applied to that recipe.
exactly, exactly.
and
But so, in
and
other words, it then becomes your master
yeah,
because
exactly.
it's
Like
easier to do this way because the technology makes it fits the technology instead of making the technology do what is going on inside your head or whatever. we end up getting ahead to do what the technology allows us to do.
Hmm.
And I often tell the story of the wah wah pedal, and somebody that I knew was at Vox Jennings when the wah wah pedal prototype came out, and this thing was demonstrated, and they all went, yeah, like they couldn't see why this was such a good idea, having a tone pot in a box. And then they gave one to Jimi Hendrix. And then, of course, Hendrix had a sound in his head that he could go like, oh, okay, I can get the guitar to talk, right? Then everybody bought the Vox wah wah pedal to sound like Jimi Hendrix, not to sound like themselves.
Yeah.
Because that's what it does. It you get that thing and you go, oh my goodness, I could do that, because you've seen it in operation, which again is the technology sort of luring you in, and then everything you do then works with the technology.
It's exactly I think it's called the hacker's mentality.
It's called what?
The hacker's mentality.
The hacker's mentality. Yeah.
Which like you see something out new, and it's not what does it do, is what can I do with it?
Yes. Yeah. And I'm just wondering that because we have a skill as humans that if you go back far enough, that you could see that evident because of things that we created, where somebody had the ability to see something in nature and do that incredible thing of going, if I took that idea and did this with it over here, which again is, if you think about the NLP stuff, it's like, what skill have you got that's over here that you're really good at, that we can move over here to fix a problem that you've got over here? But I always use that thing about the person who must have sort of sat and looked at a spider's web and thought, that'd be a really good idea for catching fish. It's like it's completely in another place. And and there are obviously people who can do that still, but this would have been inherent in humans for problem solving, because you had to solve a problem. You couldn't just go out and buy the answer, could you? If you go back far enough. But now we've lost that. I'm just wondering how much we've lost of that ability to do that thing of spotting something that's just there, and you can misappropriate the thing.
No, I figure that there's still a lot of people doing it.
Yeah, well, I hope there is, because I think that's the thing that we need, isn't it?
But it's just that it's easy to not needing going that far, because today, I mean, my point of view, and this is a guy who's lived half his life in Africa and the other half in different places in Europe, is that in Europe everything is available, and
so you might see that. Yeah, you might see that more in Africa.
And everything is like controlled and nurtured and whatever, manicured, even nature, to the point that all that's left to do is complain. And
yes.
And you may live off that a perfect life, with whatever makes you happy in life, without ever needing to make any changes to it.
Exactly.
But when you're in an environment where it's not exactly like that, and you start to have to think differently.
Yes.
And a country like DRC, where I was born and raised, or South Africa, they probably, you could say that they have everything in terms of resources and capacity, but they have nothing in terms of using it in a way that benefits the entire population of that country, because that there's huge discrepancies between the rich and the poor. That's true everywhere in the world, but it's even truer over there. So that means that they had this concept, which is called what is called white privilege. And white privilege does not mean that you have money or that you have belongings. It means that because you came out of a white family around there, the probability of you having received an education, having parents that have received an education, having parents that have networks into places where you could go and work is much higher than if you were born anywhere else in the country with any other skin color and background. It's true for everywhere in the world. The more I think about it, and when you're in that condition and you're trying to make something for yourself, you also inherently trying to make something for others because you realize that there's huge gap, that a huge gap, which is also probably an opportunity that needs to be filled, and you cannot ignore it because it's so prominent, it's there. And that generates already in itself some sort of creativity and help between different people. Like you want to help, you want to contribute. I'm talking about myself, but not only about myself. A lot of people that I know are in this case where they're young, they came up from say middle class families, and whenever they do something, they try to think, how can I promote the culture? How can I promote the people? How can I involve the people? How can I make this thing theirs? That's a different way of thinking than I'm getting my 13th paycheck and then I need to pay my taxes, and then if I have a problem, I can go to the hospital and I'll get taken care of, and I will actually be able to afford it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I think that also, as you're saying, there's a lot of people that I know as they got older, they feel like that. Where they've actually gone back to this business of giving something back. A lot of musicians and artists who are doing this, organizing things for like, young artists and musicians, or potentially, giving the people the opportunity to do that. Because I think all the time it's that this sort of automated, click whir behavior that you see, it happens with animals, but it happens with us, where something happens and we just go into automatic mode. And I think you get to a point where something happens to you, or you have an experience like you grow up in different cultures, and you realize that there are certain things that are different in different cultures, certain things that if you come from a culture like that to as you say, like a European culture, that we take for granted that other people wouldn't take for granted because they don't have that opportunity.
Exactly, and I think the recent years have been a valuable lesson for at least my generation and yours as well.
I think it has for a lot of people.
It's because we were born in a country or in a world where we were not touched by any problem or scarcity or whatever. And now we've experienced like violence in our cities. We've experienced COVID. We've experienced now lack of petrol. I mean, when I was a kid in the late 80s, even in the middle 80s, the first thing they taught us in primary school is that there's only 20 years of fuel left.
Yes.
Here we are 40 years later, and
exactly,
and the problem is still there.
yes it is. So I think this is like the sort of narrative, isn't it? The story. And one of the things I've noticed as I've got older, and again this ties back sort of into NLP really, I think, is that, and you were talking about communication, about you communicating with other people and understanding that you could say something in a particular way that somebody else would receive in a different way because the way they see the world, the way they experience the world, what they hear people say, etc. And you look at that and you think, well, the narrative that's played out in different cultures, what we believe, where we come from, where we're going to, the sort of little stories that we get told about, that we can just carry on developing and this idea of evolving. Sometimes you look at back and you go, this idea of evolving sort of assumes that we're always going to a better place, that the people before us were not as good as we are because we've evolved. Whereas you look at nature, it's like you get creatures adapting to situations, right? Adapting to environment. That's not necessarily getting better. That's just adapting to the situation. And but that's not the narrative that you get, especially in Europe. Certainly, I'll classify this as Europe, even though technically I don't know what we are. We're sailing off
Switzerland, so.
into the distance. But you look at that and you go, it's just a story. It's just a story, and
all of it is, and I will start with a very fundamental point, and that's probably also looping back to why my mother was so into self-development. She herself grew up in DRC, and our grandparents were actually there. And then, on one of my two families, the grandparents of my grandparents were already there. And there's this big constant question that you receive wherever you are, wherever you go, especially in Africa. Say, where you're from, where do you go?
Yeah.
And it's very hard to say. If you're born, I'm a binational. My dad was Italian, my mother Belgian. I grew up in DRC, and I really belong nowhere. So in terms of saying, like, it's easy to say I'm British or I'm whatever, French or blah, blah, blah. It means nothing to me because it's just borders are even lines that only exist on a map, and they do not exist in reality.
No.
Languages exist, governments exist, ways of management exist, but in some places, in Africa is again a very good example, the lines have not been traced by the people that were there. So some tribes have been divided into two countries, and
yes,
that's true in Asia as well as true in many places. That's us, how our history that have imposed that on them. And in that sense, a very large amount of people that I've came across traveling and that are also traveling a lot haven't got that sense of identity so well defined. Like I am this or that, or I believe in this or that. And that's again something that you work through NLP and to understand that your core values and your core, what you believe is your core personality, actually influences a lot on how you perceive the world.
Yes.
Outside and how you interact with other, when the real truth is that we all brothers on this planet, we all on the same planet, and when this planet blows away, we all blow away with it. And exactly. Where we come from, the color of the skin and the shape of our eyes, there's really no difference.
No, I totally get that, because again, I can draw that analogy with music. It's like I was listening to an interview with John McLaughlin, who's like one of the great sort of jazz guitar players, jazz fusion players. And McLaughlin has got this thing where obviously he mixes sort of Indian stuff because he's always been interested in yoga and all the rest of it. But that's an integral part of his music. And somebody made some comment, they were interviewing him on, I think it was Turkish TV or something like that, right? And they were saying that because he's a sort of a legend, that he went, I'm not, he found that really difficult, you could tell this. But they were talking about this, and he was saying, but look, music is a great example about this, because you can have people, they talk different languages and they can't communicate that way. You get them sitting down and playing. It's no problem.
Yep. It playing with other people forces them to get in harmony, right? Whatever they're doing, they have to follow the same beat, and they have to.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a sort of an intrinsic thing that makes us human. Yeah. It's a brotherly thing or sisterly thing, if you like you're saying, that we're just really the same. You're part of the same thing. Okay, then you could sort of step back and then impose rules about what's going on with this different style of music, and then you start to have a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
But when people sit down and just play, you can communicate with any
I, I
musician.
I jam a lot, and I'm far from being a good musician, but I jam with people that I believe are good musicians. So that makes it easy for me because I can do my thing, and then they can help me.
Yes, well,
But
that's true, but that's also true of a good human being. If you think about it, if you've got somebody who is a really somebody who's sort of really at home with their self, if you see what I mean, that they've discovered what it is that's their core, like you're saying, the core values. What is it that makes them human? Because it's sort of strange, and we do have to, it is about stories. And get this, that humans tell stories. That is something that is deeply us. Yeah, the way that we explore the world through stories. So you get that person who understands their place, themselves within the world and the universe, and you come along and talk to them, and they can talk to you. They understand. Same things like you're saying. Great musicians can make it easier for you to sound good, and
exactly.
it's the same. It's the same. It's the same thing. I think.
And it's something that I found a lot in art. I did some theater as well with
Yes.
a professional director. And that was also mind blowing because the difference between feeling the emotion and playing the emotion is very thin, but it's actually very deep. When you really have to do it for yourself. So like if you're playing a character that's quite different from yours, and you have to
Yes.
change your, I mean, let's say not change your, but adapt
Yes.
or become that other
Yes.
character that you're playing that is completely different, and you see the world differently, has a different background, have had different experiences.
Yeah.
It means that you can actually, in a snap, with a little bit of training, you can change completely yourself from the one side to the other, and that's one of the of the elements that NLP carries
Yes.
as well. And
Yes.
it's only difficult if you make it difficult, and the limit is the only limit that you give yourself
Yes.
and your
Yes.
body,
Totally. Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
limit of physics still.
Yes. It's quite good how this stuff keeps looping back to sort of NLP. But it is absolutely right.
So that
And
mindset from the musical jamming experience, that mindset from it's something that goes across boundaries, and boundaries are only there because they are imagined and shared by so many people. There are rules, sort of, that
mm,
people put together so that this would be that or this would be that. Um, but these rules only exist because we believe in them.
yes.
And
Yes.
and I'll give you another stupid example, completely different again for people who don't relate to music, but like wine, for instance. So France makes great wine, everybody knows that. And but the rules that they have in the winemaking are extremely strict. Like, you can only, if your parcel goes 2 meters above this limit, you cannot call it a Bordeaux. You have to change the name. It's a village wine. Or if you cannot mix the grapes from here with the grapes from there, and you can, all of these things. You cannot water your grapes. But if you go to New World wines like South African wine, um, you can do whatever you want. You want to buy grapes all over the planet, put them together, and make the best wine that you think you can make with these. Go on, do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's sort of, and they manage that way to make very good product. I'm
Yes.
not saying like for a wine aficionado,
No,
it'll be
no,
a
but
great wine, but
I totally get that. And again,
it's
I,
it's it's the rules that the ones have that are not imposed to the others that
yeah,
make this others sometimes more interesting. You might like it or you might not like it, but they'll
yeah,
present you the wine differently. They'll say, "Oh, this wine tastes like chocolate. You want to
yeah,
try?"
yeah,
And you're like,
yeah, yeah.
I don't think so, but
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So you, your journeys with your coffee drinking, where have you been? Just to sort of get people into the flavour of how much you've travelled.
yo, I'm not sure how many pictures I have, but I think definitely over 80, probably
Yes.
around
So
100.
you 80 different places.
And there were a few places which were like short trips in
Yeah.
Europe, but mostly I think I've covered most of Africa.
Yeah.
Recently, I was in Japan. Let me try and just go through opening this thing. 99 pictures.
99 pictures.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I see some from Italy in the mountains, some from Israel, some from New York, some from um, this one is Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, Morocco, Western Sahara,
Wow.
Mauritania, Ghana, Benin, Burkina Faso, Iceland. This is Rome. This is France in the Vosges. This is Netherlands. I mean, I can go on, but it's like Rwanda, Burundi. There's Argentina, Uruguay. There's Chile, South Africa, obviously. Malawi was quite a nice one.
Yeah, brilliant. I tell you what would be really nice if you post me a couple that I could.
Yeah, definitely. They're all on Facebook.
They're on Facebook. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, I've got more than that. I try to not publish too many either.
No.
But the thing is that, like, when you get to, I mean, in the beginning it was original, and then at some point I felt like, okay, it's becoming too much of the
Yeah, yeah,
same. So I started to become a bit creative with them.
yeah,
So
yeah. Because some of the pictures are absolutely brilliant. You know. So yeah, it's good. It's great.
yeah, there's
So
somewhere I'm flying. There's somewhere got I don't know. It's about like finding the right place in the right moment. It's became this thing like when I travel. I'm
yeah,
like, okay, yeah, this is a spot. It's quite representative of the place, and there's this thing that's happening. So like Japan, you're in the middle of a street. It's got lights everywhere, millions of people walking around.
yeah,
And say it would be perfect to have me just being still there in the middle while
yeah,
everyone is walking around me
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
having
yeah.
my coffee. And that's what we did. And it's
Yeah,
just
it's brilliant. It's great. It's good. Right. Well, that we've been talking for nearly an hour, so that's pretty cool. Um, so you're now back in you're in Geneva now.
yeah, I'm in Geneva since about a year.
Yeah, yeah. So this is you're sort of going to be there for a while now, presumably, because of this new thing you're doing, or you're not sure.
I don't know where life's going. I don't project myself too far,
No, 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 no. That's cool. That's
especially
cool.
these days.
No, no.
But yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah,
It's I'd like to think that I am a bit wild, and this place is tamed.
yeah. Well, yes. Well, I've never been. I've never been to Geneva, but I was. I used to be in a band with Roger Moore's son. You know, the guy was James Bond. And they lived in Geneva, I think. Well, that was one of the houses that they had dotted around, and it always sounded when he spoke about it, it always seemed quite genteel, I think is the word. Going back to our English etiquette stuff. Um, yeah, so yeah, so if you're, it's quite a difference from being in Africa, I should think.
It is. It is. There's a. It's very hard to describe, but I know that whenever I have a conversation with a South African friend around here, they've got the same impression. Um, and is this? I think the way I like to see it, it's a connection
Mm.
that you have with nature and with other people.
Yeah,
That is that bond. It's quite strong
yeah,
in Africa in general.
yeah, 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 yeah. I
Although
bet.
I'm not generalizing between the people. There are
No,
jokes
no,
like
no, no,
everywhere on
no.
the planet. There are very good people, but I think in general it's easier to bond with nature. It's easier to bond with people because it's got less of a human imprint on it. We haven't shaped it to the way that we like it. It's there. There are some paths to travel through, but everyone is like, "This is the path we made. Please respect the nature." Like, and it's yeah, it's very very strong.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's that bond. I find it quite difficult to get it in these parts of the world, or that must just be me and
No,
you
no,
know
I
like
don't. No, I wouldn't have thought so. No, because for me, okay, the UK's a small place with a lot of people trying to live in it. But when if I live more sort of in the countryside as much as you can in Sussex, but there is a definite feeling of difference when I come out of there and go into a town. And obviously, if I don't go to London at all. I just can't cope with it. It's too chaotic and too, as you say, for me, it's sort of I feel disconnected. I just feel absolutely exhausted if I go there and come back. Whereas if I can go out walking in the countryside, and I can walk for miles and miles and miles and never feel that feeling of being drained somehow.
exactly
It's an interesting thing, and I
to
can't really
to
put
the
my finger on
contrary.
it. I don't know what it is. It's only a feeling for me.
Well,
Uh,
one thing that we seem to be very good at forgetting is that we are nature.
yes,
And
yes,
I mean, I was in Tokyo just a few weeks ago, just a few days ago. It's like 37 million inhabitants, 1,600 square kilometer. It's massive, and it's not nature.
no, exactly,
It's
exactly.
crazy I mean, a very high level. But if you compare it with another city like Kyoto, for instance, it's got less people, but and less high rises and more nature around, like you can walk in the mountains and all of that. It's a completely different atmosphere. It's a completely different feeling. It's less oppressing. It's more like
Yes,
more natural. So I mean, Geneva is a very small city, so like 10 minutes you're out in the fields and there's mountains all around, so it's easy to escape.
mm, mm,
But the feeling you have in the mountains is unique.
yes,
It's the feeling of being small and and
yes.
meaningless compared to nature in general.
I think that is the thing. There is something in that feeling of being almost just not that important. It's quite it's quite a powerful thing. Whereas, of course, if you're in a city, it's a different feeling, isn't it? It's like I don't know what it is. It's just humbling, maybe the word.
Yeah, yeah, humbling, definitely. And I think it's just natural.
Mm.
It's just us being with more of us. I mean,
Yes,
like being in nature is a normal thing. Being in a garden is fulfilling. If you
yes,
go to a very beautiful garden, you get immediately into a different state of mind.
mm,
You can feel better, you can breathe better, you feel, I don't know, healthier or more positive. I mean, I'm again talking for myself, but
no, no, I totally agree.
and
I
and I've
totally agree.
even more so in a garden that's natural than in a garden that's like, just grass.
Yes, yes, yeah, exactly. Well, that was brilliant. It's really good, Bruno. I think we've done a good had a good chat there, and I like the way we kept referencing NLP because I've interviewed a few sort of practitioners, but this was quite good because it sort of tied a lot of stuff into that.
I think what I like about NLP, it's the ultimate lesson is that human beings are subjective, and everything therefore is subjective because we are interpreting it.
Yes, totally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 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 yeah. Brilliant.
But yeah, it's for me. It's sometimes getting back to the core of things is getting to the people that we share bonds with, the nature we share bond with, the things we can, like whenever you go into, I don't know, any meditative practice, yoga or what, it's always about like closing your eyes and feeling this vibration of the world inside of you because we vibrate with our cells or whatever
Mm,
that means. But once you get to that point where you stop worrying about everything that your day takes you to, and then you just listen
mm,
to what's around you and you try to feel it, it's completely different. You really feel connected a lot faster when you do that, and it's sometimes about just accepting other people's differences and liking them because it's another version of subjectivity.
Yes, totally. That's good. Yeah, that's good. All right, then, mate. That was really good. So thanks ever so much. And,
Thank you. Thanks a
and if
lot.
you know when you're in the UK next, because I'm sure you will be on your travels at some point,
And we'll have a coffee together.
we'll have a coffee and we'll photograph.
With
That's
great
awesome.
pleasure.
Yeah, super. Thanks ever so much. Speak
Thank
soon.
you.